The minute I was able to realize, like, my father was probably one of the best fathers in the world.
Are you excited to be a grandfather?
Yes, I am. I'm ecstatic. When I got news, I was like so.
Rihanna just lost her father, but this wasn't just another heartbreaking celebrity headline. Behind the news of Ronald Fenty's death is a twisted, emotional roller coaster that's been quietly unfolding for years. To outsiders, he was simply the man who raised a global icon. But to Rihanna, he was both the protector of her childhood dreams and the source of some of her deepest emotional scars. Their bond was never picture perfect. In fact, it was fractured by addiction, betrayal, and public humiliation. At one point, she cut ties. At another, she took legal action against him, suing her own father for exploiting her name.
Rihanna is one of the youngest self-made billionaires, but she doesn't have a good relationship with her father, and because he's an idiot, she had to sue him. And Rihanna had issues with her father.
Yet, in a shocking twist, she was the one rushing him to the hospital in his final days, standing by his side as his body gave out, and his past finally caught up to him. Why would someone return to the bedside of the man who betrayed her trust, sold her private trauma to the media, and tried to profit off her fame? The answer isn't simple. It's a story about pain, forgiveness, and the blurred lines between love and survival. And it reveals a side of Rihanna the cameras rarely capture, the daughter, not the superstar. What happened in those final moments? And what does it say about the complicated legacy Ronald Fenty left behind? On May 30th, 2025, Ronald Fenty's life quietly came to an end inside Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles.
What it was is I had to forgive him because I cared about him still. And
He was 70 years old, but there was nothing quiet about how he left this world. His final days were a storm of medical emergencies. Metastatic pancreatic cancer had spread aggressively. His lungs had begun to collapse from aspiration pneumonia, and his body was shutting down. Acute respiratory failure suffocated his breath. His kidneys failed. His organs followed. And just like that, the man who once held Rihanna as a baby slipped away from the world. The death certificate, later obtained by TMZ, read like a catalog of suffering: pancreatic cancer, respiratory failure, renal failure, acute tubular necrosis.
Rihanna blames herself for her father's death, and she completely broke down when the doctor informed her of the cause of Ron.
For most, it would be clinical data. For Rihanna, it was the final chapter of a relationship scarred by both love and pain. But here's the part that no one expected. Rihanna was there. She didn't just send flowers, she didn't post a captioned tribute or release a carefully crafted statement. She physically helped get him to the hospital. According to reports, she rode in the car that rushed him to Cedars-Sinai on May 28th, 2 days before he passed. Her younger brother Rajad was photographed outside the hospital as well, pacing, eyes low, avoiding cameras. There was no press around her, no red carpet lenses or fanfare.
Multiple outlets report that on May 31st, the singer's dad, Ronald Fenty, has died at the age of 70. And while
Just a daughter quietly showing up for a man who, at many points in her life, hadn't shown up for her. To the world, Ronald Fenty was an obscure name. But behind closed doors, he was the first man Rihanna ever loved, and the first man who broke her heart. Their relationship wasn't clean, it wasn't linear. It was built on contradictions. Intense love mixed with betrayal, warmth overshadowed by trauma. So what brought her back to him in those final moments? Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was forgiveness. Maybe it was something deeper that only children of fractured families can understand. The quiet hope that the final goodbye might heal what time never could.
Want his illness to affect his pregnant daughter. Trying to make up for his mistakes, he chose to die alone. Rest in peace, Ronald.
Whatever the reason, her presence there sent a message louder than any statement could. This wasn't just about death. This was about reckoning. The end of a chapter that had been writing itself since Rihanna was a little girl in Barbados. But if the ending was that heavy, what was the beginning like? Before the fashion shows, the platinum albums, and the magazine covers, Rihanna was just Robin, an observant, wide-eyed girl growing up in a modest bungalow in Bridgetown, Barbados. She was the eldest of 3 siblings, raised in a household that looked normal on the outside. But behind closed doors, everything was breaking apart.
I think Rihanna guided herself where she wanted to go. She always was very good at...
Her father, Ronald Fenty, was a man of opposites. At times, he was gentle and encouraging. He taught Rihanna to dream big, to speak her mind, to be fearless. But those moments were always shadowed by darker ones, fueled by his addiction. Drugs and alcohol controlled him. And when they took hold, the man she loved disappeared into someone unrecognizable. Rihanna grew up watching her mother, Monica Braithwaite, suffer quietly. The shouting matches, the slammed doors, the silent tension that hung in the air like a heavy fog. It wasn't just about the fights, it was about the fear.
Awful as he was to my mom, at times, it didn't compare to how great he was as a father.
A fear no child should carry. Some nights, Rihanna would pray that things would be different in the morning. Other nights, she learned how to tune it all out, building invisible walls around herself that would follow her well into adulthood. She once said, "I saw too much at a young age." And that wasn't just a quote, it was a quiet confession of a childhood stained by trauma. At school, she smiled. At home, she survived. The final blow came in 2002 when Rihanna was 14 years old. Her parents' marriage, already fractured beyond repair, officially ended in divorce. For Rihanna, it wasn't just the end of a family unit, it was the confirmation.
Angry about a lot of things from my childhood, and I couldn't separate him as a husband from him as a father.
That her sense of safety had always been a lie. The divorce didn't bring relief, it brought resentment. Years of bottled up questions with no answers. Why couldn't he stop? Why did he choose the addiction over them? What made it worse was the contradiction living inside her. Because as much as she hated what he did, part of her still loved him. And that duality was tormenting. "I was so angry at him," she told Oprah in 2012. "And I was angry about a lot of things from my childhood. But I couldn't separate him as a husband from him as a father." That sentence revealed a lifetime of confusion. Because while Ronald may have failed as a partner,
with her hairbrush on the microphone,
Singing.
and dancing and checking herself in the mirror to see if anything...
Rihanna still clung to the memories where he had shown up, teaching her lessons, celebrating her wins, reminding her she was capable of anything. This emotional tug-of-war shaped her relationships, her independence, even her music. You can hear it in her voice, strong yet vulnerable, fierce but wounded. It's the sound of someone who learned to build walls because the people closest to her kept breaking in with wrecking balls. And even after the divorce, the damage didn't end. Ronald Fenty was no longer in the same house, but his presence, his legacy, his contradictions stayed with her. It would take years before she even began to confront the scars.
I have forgiven him. It took me a long time.
But when she finally did, it wasn't through a song or a headline. It happened in a quiet, tear-filled conversation that would air on national television and change the way the world saw Rihanna forever. In 2012, Rihanna sat across from Oprah Winfrey, calm on the outside, but visibly carrying something heavy. It wasn't a promotional interview. It wasn't a media tour. It was a raw, vulnerable sit-down in her homeland of Barbados, where the cameras captured something the world had rarely seen. The little girl behind the global brand, finally opening up about the man who had shaped and shattered so much of her early life.
Angry for a long time. I felt like this is not my fault. This is not me doing this, and still I have to
What unfolded wasn't just shocking, it was heartbreaking. I was angry at him, she said, tears gathering in her eyes. So angry. And I was angry about so many things from my childhood. Her voice cracked, not from performance, but from the weight of decades spent holding it in. For the first time, Rihanna admitted that her father's failures had haunted her relationships, her trust, even her sense of love. She didn't cry like a celebrity. She cried like a daughter, still trying to understand why her childhood had to be so confusing. But what she said next surprised everyone watching. The minute I was able to realize my father was probably one of the best fathers in the world.
Father-daughter relationships, it's the first way any child, learns what it means.
Like, he taught me everything. Her voice softened. As awful as he was to my mom at times, it didn't compare to how great he was as a father. She paused, then added something that cut deep, and I had to come to terms with that. In that moment, Rihanna did what most people spend a lifetime avoiding. She humanized her pain. She didn't excuse his behavior. She didn't rewrite the past. She simply admitted that it was both devastating and beautiful, damaging and loving, a father who failed as a partner but showed up in other ways that still mattered to a young girl desperate for stability. This was more than an interview. It was a public reckoning. Rihanna wasn't just speaking for herself. She was voicing what so many people feel when family trauma isn't clean or one-sided.
I was able to realize, my father was probably one of the best fathers in the world. He taught me everything.
That emotional complexity, learning to forgive someone without forgetting what they did, hit viewers in a way that no tabloid ever could. For years, the public had seen Rihanna as strong, unshakable, untouchable. But here she was telling Oprah and the world that she was still healing, still figuring it out, still carrying the weight of a father who gave her both wings and wounds. It looked like closure. But what no one knew at the time was that the most shocking chapter in their story hadn't happened yet. Because just a few years later, the same man who taught Rihanna how to hustle...
As a matter of fact, right, we wanted you to come for Father's Day. When Father's Day was?
...to turn that lesson against her. For a moment, it seemed like healing was possible. After years of pain, distance, and uncomfortable truths, Rihanna had started to forgive. The Oprah interview in 2012 wasn't just for ratings. It was her way of publicly showing that she was ready to move forward with her father. She had come to terms with the complexity of their past. She had peeled back the layers and made peace with the idea that he had failed in some ways, but succeeded in others. But less than a few years before that interview, something had happened that almost shattered that fragile progress. In 2009, Rihanna's name dominated headlines for all the wrong reasons. The violent assault at the hands of then-boyfriend Chris Brown became a global media event. Photos were leaked, police reports were dissected, and...
including assault after an argument with his girlfriend Rihanna. Police never identified Rihanna directly, but Thursday's court
Rihanna, usually so composed and private, became a symbol of both strength and suffering. It was a nightmare, and it only got worse. Because while the world debated what happened to her, her own father was speaking to the press, without her permission. Ronald Fenty gave interviews to multiple outlets, offering details about Rihanna's condition, her emotional response, even speculating on her future with Chris. This wasn't a loving father defending his daughter. This was something else, something colder, something transactional. To Rihanna, it felt like betrayal at the most personal level. You grow up with your father, she later said, visibly pained.
Since Brown's arrest, the celebrity tabloids have been buzzing.
And then he does something so bizarre, I can't begin to wrap my mind around it. That wasn't just frustration. That was heartbreak. Imagine enduring one of the most humiliating, traumatic experiences of your life and realizing that someone who's supposed to shield you from the world is instead helping feed it. Not behind the scenes, not in private, but in full view of the tabloids, cameras, and headlines. It wasn't the first time Ronald had put his daughter in an impossible position, but this time it was public. This time it was personal in a way that couldn't be undone. The damage was immediate. Rihanna reportedly cut off contact.
What your father had
she
done
kept her distance.
And what Chris had done.
Yes.
And although she didn't
Because,
speak in
you know,
detail about it at the time, the look in her eyes when she referenced it said more than words ever could. This wasn't just a crack in the relationship. It was a fault line, one that had been forming since her childhood and had finally split wide open under the weight of betrayal. And yet even after that, she tried to find her way back to him. Maybe out of hope, maybe out of habit, maybe out of love. But if she thought the worst was behind her, she was wrong. Because in 2019, Ronald Fenty would do something that crossed a line no one ever expected. He'd stop selling her story and start selling her name. By 2019, Rihanna was no longer just a singer. She was an empire. Fenty Beauty had exploded into a billion-dollar brand.
Name Fenty is a big deal. It's a big name. I might actually have some makeup that's Fenty.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Savage X Fenty was revolutionizing the fashion industry. Her name, Fenty, was no longer just a surname. It was a statement, a trademark, a global powerhouse. And then Ronald Fenty crossed a line that left her no choice but to fight back in court. Without her knowledge or approval, Ronald and his business partner launched a company called Fenty Entertainment. The name wasn't subtle, it was calculated. He posed as her manager, used her brand, promised clients connections that didn't exist. And most importantly, he banked on one dangerous assumption, that the world would believe him simply because of who he was. But Rihanna wasn't about to let anyone, family or not, exploit her identity. In a shocking move, she filed a lawsuit against her own father, not quietly, not privately.
It's coming after Rihanna accused and sued her father of using the family name Fenty, which is also her brand name, to promote his
Public court documents revealed claims of false advertising, invasion of privacy, and deliberate misrepresentation. According to the filings, Ronald had been using her name to book entertainment deals across the globe, some allegedly worth millions, without ever consulting her. It was a betrayal of a different kind. This wasn't just personal, this was professional. Ronald had taken the very thing she built with blood, sweat, and survival and tried to use it for his own gain. The media exploded. Headlines like "Rihanna sues her father" dominated entertainment news. Fans were stunned. After everything she'd endured, the addiction, the trauma, the public humiliation, now she was going to war with the man who gave her life. But Rihanna didn't flinch. She stood firm. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about boundaries. And yet, despite everything, the lawsuit never made it to trial. Just 3 weeks before the court date, Rihanna filed to dismiss the case.
Entertainment news, and our first story goes thus. Rihanna drops lawsuits against her father. Barbadian singer...
No explanation, no comment, just silence. Was there a private settlement? Did Ronald apologize? Or did Rihanna simply decide that the emotional cost of continuing wasn't worth it? No one knows. And maybe that silence says more than any statement ever could. She had taken a stand, drawn a line, and then quietly stepped back, choosing peace over conflict, or perhaps exhaustion over endless battle. But even after the case was closed, the cracks in their relationship remained. And while the world speculated, Rihanna stayed silent. Until years later, when Ronald's health took a turn and all the lawsuits, pain, and pride suddenly didn't matter anymore.
Tabloids and the media and the global, on the global stage, we see your name. And,
When Rihanna dropped the lawsuit in 2021, the world waited for answers that never came. There were no public apologies, no reconciliations, no press tours explaining why one of the most powerful women in the world had just backed down from a battle with her own father. The case simply disappeared. And that silence, it was deafening. For someone like Rihanna, known for her confidence, her outspokenness, her refusal to be disrespected, The quiet retreat spoke volumes. Was it mercy, fatigue, a behind-the-scenes agreement? Or was it simply the last exhausted sigh of a daughter who had spent her entire life navigating emotional landmines? Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. Just because the legal fight had ended didn't mean the wounds had healed. Even without courtrooms or contracts, the tension between Rihanna and Ronald didn't just fade.
It was ugly, it was angry, it was inflamed, it was tainted, and I realized that
they weren't seen together in public. No joint appearances, no social media tributes. When Rihanna posted family moments, he was conspicuously absent, and yet she never slammed him publicly. No interviews, no indirect jabs, just silence, strategic perhaps, or maybe protective. Because when it comes to family, not everything needs to be said out loud. Still, for fans watching from the outside, the emotional math never quite added up. How do you go from defending your father on national TV to suing him for fraud, to suddenly dropping everything with no explanation?
And part of that, but now she has dropped that lawsuit, so that's nice. Beautiful thing to not have to sue your own dad. She's also...
The answer might lie in something deeper, something unspoken. Maybe Rihanna was done trying to fix something that was never hers to repair. Maybe she finally realized that love doesn't always come with closure, and that sometimes protecting your peace means walking away without a final word. But life doesn't always let wounds rest quietly, because in 2025, just 4 years after the lawsuit was dropped, Ronald Fenty would be back in Rihanna's life once more, but not through reconciliation, through tragedy. In the end, it wasn't a lawsuit, an apology, or a dramatic reunion that brought Rihanna and her father back together. It was death.
Network News, which is based in their home country of Barbados, that family members gathered in California before Ronald passed away
On May 28, 2025, just 2 days before Ronald Fenty's passing, Rihanna was spotted entering Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. No entourage, no flashing lights, just a daughter helping her father through his final moments. Sources close to the family confirmed what many had long speculated. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, the lawsuit, the trauma, Rihanna never truly let go. She was reportedly in the car that rushed Ronald to the hospital as his body began to fail. Her brother Rajad followed closely behind. There were no cameras allowed in, no social media updates, no headlines announcing a reunion, but she was there. And that one act spoke louder than any interview ever could. Ronald Fenty didn't die alone.
Rihanna's brother, Ronald Fenty, was photographed arriving at a Los Angeles hospital, reportedly with the Grammy winner in the car.
He died surrounded by family, by the same daughter who had once wept on Oprah's couch over his failures, the same woman who had built a global empire after years of surviving the very instability he created. In those final days, none of that mattered. Not the betrayal, not the business, not even the pain. All that was left was humanity. There was no public reconciliation, no statement confirming a repaired bond. But the silence itself, the dignity in it, felt intentional. As if Rihanna knew that forgiveness wasn't always something you declared. Sometimes it's just something you do. In the quiet of that hospital room, she wasn't a billionaire mogul or a global icon. She was Robin again. The little girl from Barbados who had loved her father, hated him, missed him, sued him, and still showed up when it mattered most. Because love, in its most complicated form, doesn't always come with clarity.
It does not mean that you are weak or that you are a victim or that you are...
That's what I had.
Sometimes it comes with contradictions, and in that moment, Rihanna embraced them all. Whatever words were said in those final hours will never be known. And maybe that's the point, because some endings aren't about closure, they're about grace. Ronald Fenty's story isn't one of redemption or downfall. It's something murkier, something more human. He wasn't a villain, he wasn't a hero. He was a man who did what too many do, hurt the people he loved, often without realizing how deeply the damage ran. To the world, he was Rihanna's father, a name, a footnote in the rise of a global superstar. But to Rihanna, he was a storm she spent her whole life navigating. A man who gave her both ambition and ache, confidence and confusion. Their relationship never fit into neat categories. It evolved, collapsed, healed, then fractured again. It was love wrapped in pain, loyalty tested by betrayal. And even after lawsuits and headlines, the final act wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was quiet, intimate, and devastating. In the end, Rihanna didn't seek revenge. She didn't need a courtroom win to prove her point. She showed up. She said goodbye. And she reminded the world that family, even at its most broken, still pulls us back in ways we can't always explain. Ronald Fenty's legacy isn't clean, but maybe that's exactly why it matters. Because behind every powerhouse like Rihanna, there's a past, complicated, messy, sometimes painful, that shaped who they became. And now with her third child on the way, Rihanna steps into motherhood once again. Perhaps with a deeper understanding of what it means to raise a child in a world full of contradictions, to protect them from the same shadows she had to survive, to break the cycle without erasing the history. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose a different ending. Rihanna just lost her father, but this wasn't just another heartbreaking celebrity headline. Behind the news of Ronald Fenty's death is a twisted, emotional roller coaster that's been quietly unfolding for years. To outsiders, he was simply the man who raised a global icon. But to Rihanna, he was both the protector of her childhood dreams and the source of some of her deepest emotional scars.